everybody. I'm glad that you're back. Last week we talked about Joseph and his brothers and how Joseph became second to Pharaoh, and he planned ahead for a famine that was coming, and he saved his 11 brothers and his father by moving them to Egypt. Well, guess what? It's 400 years later, which is a really long time. Like, think about this. America is only about 250 years old, so not quite, but almost twice as long as America has been a country. That's how long the Israelites have been living in Egypt. And things started out really great for the Israelites in Egypt, but over time things changed. Today our story is about Moses, and Moses is pretty much the entire book of Exodus. And so I'm just going to be reading excerpts. So we're going to do things a little bit different today. Instead of having you read along with me, I'm just going to kind of tell the story, and I have some kind of graphic novel pictures to kind of that you can watch the story as I tell it. So we're going to start off in Exodus 1 and kind of travel through the whole book of Exodus. So strap in, here we go. The people of Israel had many children. There were so many of them that they filled the land. Then a new king came into power in Egypt. Joseph didn't mean anything to him. Look, he said, these Israelites are far too many for us. If war breaks out, they'll join our enemies. They'll fight against us and leave the country. So the Egyptians put slave drivers over the people of Israel. The slave drivers treated them badly and made them work hard. Pharaoh gave an order, throw every Hebrew baby boy into the river. Now a Hebrew woman had a baby. She made a basket out of tall grass and coated it with tar, and she placed the child in the basket and put it along the bank of the Nile River. The child's sister was close, watching to see what would happen. And Pharaoh's daughter went into the Nile River. She saw the basket in the tall grass, and she sent her slave to get it. When she opened it, Pharaoh's daughter saw the baby, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses, and she said, I pulled him out of the water. Now Moses grew up, and one day he was watching the slaves hard at work, and he saw an Egyptian hitting a Hebrew man. The man was one of Moses' own people, so he killed the Egyptian, and then he hid his body in the sand. When Pharaoh heard about what had happened, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses escaped and went to live in Midian. There he married a woman from Midian and had a son, and the slaves in Israel cried out to God. And God heard their groans, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham. Do you remember the covenant with Abraham? There was two parts. One, that God would give him a promised land, and number two, that God would make his descendants as many as the stars in the sky. Moses was tending sheep on the mountain of God when the angel of the Lord appeared to him from inside a burning bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it didn't burn up. And God spoke to him from the bush, Moses, Moses, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham. Now, when Moses heard this, he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have seen how my people are suffering in Egypt. I have heard their cry. I am sending you to Pharaoh. I want you to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. They are my people. Moses spoke to God. Who am I that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. I will give you a sign. It will prove to you that I have sent you. And Moses said, suppose I go to the people of Israel and they ask me, what's God's name? What should I tell them? And God said, tell them that I am has sent me to you. So Moses, his wife and his son went to Egypt. He took his walking stick, and this was a stick that God would use in many powerful ways in the future. Moses and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, the Lord God of Israel says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, I don't know the Lord, and I won't let Israel go. The Lord warned Moses, Pharaoh will say, do a miracle. So take your walking stick and throw it down in front of Pharaoh. It will turn into a snake. So Moses did what God commanded him. But Pharaoh wouldn't listen, just as the Lord had said. God said, Pharaoh is stubborn. Pharaoh will go down to the Nile River, Go and meet him there with the walking stick that turned into a snake. Say, the God of the Hebrews has sent me to you. He says, let my people go. Here is how you will know that I am the Lord. I will strike the water of the river Nile. The river will turn into blood. The fish will die. The river will stink. And the Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. Moses did as God commanded, but Pharaoh would not listen to Moses. God sent 8 more plagues on Egypt. The Lord God said, let my people go so that they may worship me. And if you refuse to let them go, I will plague your whole country with frogs. And the Nile teemed with frogs. They will come up into your palace, into your bedroom, into your bed. Ew, gross. Into the houses of your officials and on your people, and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will go up on you and your people and all your officials. But Pharaoh still said, I will not let your people go. The Lord said, stretch out thy rod, Moses, and smite the dust of the land, and it will become as lice throughout all of the land of Egypt. So he stretched out his hand with the rod and struck the ground, and lice came upon the men and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became lice. That's even worse than frogs. The 4th plague of Egypt were flies that came upon the Egyptians, but they did not affect the Israelites. Pharaoh asked Moses to remove this plague and promised to grant the Israelites their freedom. However, after the plague was gone, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he refused to keep his promise. Then the Lord brought a terrible plague on the livestock of the field, the horses and the donkeys and the camels, and on the cattle and the sheep and the goats. But Pharaoh would still not let the people go. Then the Lord said to Moses, take a handful of soot from the furnace and toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh, and it will become as a fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on men and animals throughout the land. A boil is like a very, very sore, and it's very painful. Then the Lord said to Moses, give an order to bring your livestock and everything that you have in the field to a place of shelter, because hail will fall on every man and animal that has not been brought in, and they will die. So the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed to the ground, and the Lord rained down hail on the land of Egypt. The hail fell and lightning flashed back and forth. It was the worst storm in all the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Then God said, let my people go. If you refuse to let them go, I will bring locusts on your country. They will cover the face of the ground so that it cannot be seen. They will devour what little you have left after the hail, including every tree that is growing in your fields. They will fill your houses, and neither your fathers nor your forefathers have ever seen anything like this. But Pharaoh would not let Israel go. So God said to Moses, I will bring 1 more plague on Egypt, and after that Pharaoh will let your people go. About midnight I will go through every part of Egypt, and the oldest son in Egypt will die. Tell Israel every family must sacrifice a lamb, and take some of the blood and put it on the sides and the doortops of the door frames in the houses. The blood on your house will be a sign. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No deadly plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. That same night, eat bread made without yeast. It is the Lord's Passover. You must celebrate this day as a feast to honor the Lord forever. If you remember, a couple months ago in Kids First Worship, we celebrated Passover together with the very flat bread and the grape juice and the bitter herbs and the egg. Do you remember that? This is how it started. At midnight, the Lord struck down the oldest son in Egypt. He killed the oldest son of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh sent for Moses and said, get out of here! You and the Israelites, leave my people! Now there were about 600,000 men old enough to go into battle, and women and children. So the Israelites took large flocks with them, And Moses took the bones of Joseph along with him. Remember, we talked about how Joseph made his brothers promise that they would bury his bones in the promised land when they left Israel, when they left Egypt to go back to Israel. Well, this is what is happening, and they're taking Joseph's bones along with them. All the Lord's people marched out of Egypt like an army at the end of 430 years to the exact day. By day, the Lord went ahead of them with a pillar of cloud, and at night he led them with a pillar of fire. It gave them light. Well, after a little while, Pharaoh changed his mind about the Israelites. He said, "What have I done? We've lost our slaves and all the work they used to do for us." So he made his chariot ready. He took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots in Egypt. And the Egyptians caught up with the Israelites as they camped by the Red Sea. The Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they were terrified. They cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Why did you bring us to the desert to die?" And Moses answered, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm. You will see how the Lord will save you today. Do you see those Egyptians? You will never see them again. The Lord will fight for you." The Lord said to Moses, "Hold out your walking stick. Reach your hand over the Red Sea to divide the water, and then the people can go through the sea on dry ground." The pillar of cloud went behind them, and it came between the armies of the Egyptians and the Israelites. All that night the Lord pushed back the sea with a strong east wind, and he turned the sea into dry land. The people of Israel went through the sea on dry ground, and there was a wall of water on their right side and on their left. Now the Egyptians chased them. All of Pharaoh's horses and chariots followed them into the sea. And then God said, "Reach out your hand over the sea. The waters will flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots." Well, the Egyptians tried to run away from the sea, but the Lord swept them up into it, and the water flowed back and covered the chariots and men. Not one of the Egyptians was left. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground. The Lord saved Israel from the power of Egypt. Then Moses led Israel through the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert, and they didn't find any water. They must have been so thirsty. When they came to Marah, the water was bitter, and the people said, "What are we supposed to drink?" And the Lord showed Moses to throw a stick into the water, and the water became fit to drink. In the desert, the people weren't happy with Moses. They said, "We wish God had put us to death in Egypt." That's really ungrateful, isn't it? "We ate all the food we wanted, but you've brought us out into this desert. You want this entire community to die of hunger." And the Lord said, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people must go out each day and gather enough bread for that day." And that evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning the ground around the camp was covered with dew, and when the dew was gone, thin little flakes appeared on the desert floor. It looked like frost on the ground. The Israelites saw the flakes, and they asked each other, "What is that?" They didn't know what it was, and Moses said to them, "It is bread that the Lord has given you to eat." The Israelites called the bread manna, and it was like coriander seeds. It tasted like wafers made with honey. The Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they reached the border of Canaan. Exactly 3 months after the Israelites left Egypt, they came to the desert of Sinai, and they camped there in front of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it with fire. The smoke billowed up from it like a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, the Lord descended on the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and God said, "I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. That is the land where you were slaves. So do not put any gods in place of me. Do not make statues of gods. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember to keep the Sabbath day holy and honor your father and mother. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not lie. Do not want anything that your neighbor owns. God also gave Moses commands about how to build the tabernacle and other Jewish laws. While Moses was on the mountain, the people saw thunder and lightning, and they heard the trumpet, and they saw the mountain covered with smoke, and they trembled in fear. Moses stayed on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. The people saw that Moses took a long time to come down, so they gathered around Aaron, and they said, "Come, make us a god that will lead us." So Aaron took gold from the people and made a metal statue in the shape of a calf. Aaron said to the people, "Israel, here is your God who brought you up out of Egypt." When Moses approached the camp, he saw the calf, and he was very angry. He burned the calf in the fire, and he went back up the mountain to pray to the Lord. He said, "These people have committed a terrible sin. They have made a god out of gold for themselves," which, by the way, broke the very first commandment of the 10 Commandments. "Now please forgive their sin." "I will," said God. And Moses came down from Mount Sinai. He had 2 tablets of the covenant of the law in his hand, and his face was shining because he had spoken with the Lord. Moses spoke to the whole community, and he said, "Here is what God has commanded. Take an offering for the Lord from what you have, and all the skilled workers among you must make a holy tent." Bezalel made an ark of the covenant out of acacia wood. It was 3 feet 9 inches long and 2 feet 3 inches high, and he covered it inside and out with pure gold. Workers made clothes from blue and purple and red yarn for the priests who were serving in the holy tent. Moses made the holy tent, the tabernacle, and the cloud covered the tent. The glory of the Lord filled the holy tent. Whenever the clouds lifted, the Israelites followed the cloud. Sometime later, Moses sent out 12 men to check out Canaan. They gave their report to Moses. They said, "We went into the land you sent us in, and it really does have plenty of milk and honey. Here's some of the fruit from the land." But the people who live there are very powerful. Their cities have high walls around them, and they are very large. But Joseph and Caleb said to Moses, "We should go up and take the land. We can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him says, "We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are." Because of this, the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years because they doubted that God could bring them into the promised land. Joshua was made the leader of the Israelites at the end of Moses' life, and Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land. That will be our story next week, the story of Joshua entering the promised land. Let's go back to Hebrews 11, which is the Hall of Faith, and find out why Moses is in the Hall of Faith. First of all, it's not him that's in there, but his mother that is in there in Hebrews 11:23. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. So from the very beginning, it was Moses' parents that saved him because they had faith that God would work through the life of their son. Now let's read about Moses. It is in Hebrews 11:24 through 29. By faith, Moses, when he had gone up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking forward to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger, and he persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do it, they were drowned. You know, Moses, through God, did a lot of amazing things throughout his life. But when we read about him in Hebrews 11, it's talking more about how Moses always trusted that God would take care of him in the situation rather than what he actually did. It reminds me of our memory verse today, which is Ephesians 2:8, which says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not of yourself. It is a gift of God." The next verse, which isn't on there, goes like this: "Not by works, so that no one can boast. We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God has prepared for us to do in advance." So yes, if you are a Christian, God can do amazing things through you. You are his handiwork, his masterpiece. He's what he's going to use to do great things. But it all starts with faith. Moses had faith. He had faith when he listened to God with the burning bush that God would use him. Now there was parts of the story where he was a little bit doubtful that he could do it, but God said, "I will be with you." And so he trusted that God would be with him. Whenever God told him to do something with the plagues, he trusted him and he used his staff or whatever God told him to do through faith that God would be faithful and do what he said he was going to do. When they were trapped at the Red Sea, Moses still had faith that God was going to save them from the Egyptians, even though the Egyptians were probably really scary. So I hope that hearing these stories of faith will help you have faith as well. Help you have faith in the scary times that God will be with you and that he will do great things through you if you have faith in him. So our craft for this week, I thought it'd be fun to make a little basket, because a basket is what Moses' mother put him in to go into the river. So in your folder, you have a piece of paper that looks like this. And you can either use the white or the brown side, whichever you like. And then you had a whole bundle of pipe cleaners. And so most of you all got 2 different colors. And so you can choose to make your basket half one color and half the other, or you can go every other. Okay? So here's how we start. You can either make the outside of your basket white, like this one, or I'm going to make this one brown on the outside. So you fold up a little bit, these little things, to just kind of give them a little bit of a fold. And you start with whatever color you want to start with. I'm going to start with red. And you use your pipe cleaner to weave in and out of the different colors. You can choose whether you want to have a flatter basket or a very tall basket by how tight you put in the pipe cleaners. Weaving every other one. If it gets away from you, it's okay. You can go back and start again. It's all right. Once you get the first round done, it gets easier. All right, I've done my first pipe cleaner. Now, what you do is you take your next pipe cleaner. I'm going to go every other color. And you twist a little bit at the end so it makes a continual loop, okay? So now I've got a layer of white on there. I'm going to put one more layer of red. You know, it must have been very scary for Moses' mother to put him in the water like that. But she trusted that God would take care of him even while he was in the water. So this week, I don't know what you're facing. I don't know if you are still struggling with schoolwork or if you're just really tired of being alone in your house. I just want you to know that you can trust God, that he is there with you and taking care of you, and that he cares about you. And I care about you too. Let's say a little prayer and we'll say goodbye for this week. Lord, I thank you for the gift of the Bible, and I thank you for the gift of being able to read. And Lord, I thank you for the stories of real people that faced really hard times. And we can read those and learn from them that you are with us no matter what. Lord, I pray for these kids that during the week that that you will help them know that you are with them and that you love them and that you are providing for them and caring for them. These things I pray in your name. Amen.